Vivian laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that doesn't wait for a response because it already assumes it's right. She joked, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, that there were still people in their 30s pretending to have a career working from home. Her eyes glanced across the table and landed on me like I was some uncomfortable reminder. I just stirred the cold coffee in front of me, like I always do. Vivian didn't understand that the confidence she wore so proudly was built on things she never bothered to see. But this time, the lesson she needed to learn was closer than she could imagine. My name is Ethan Green. I'm 33 years old, and I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. To most people, my story doesn't have any dramatic breaks or big celebrations. From a young age, I learned that those who speak loud take up more space. Those who work quietly have to carve their own path without expecting an audience. Vivian always knew how to take up space. Every new photo shoot, every fashion show she appeared in, became the talk of the week. My parents decorated the house with magazine clippings and small posters from local events. Meanwhile, I spent my afternoons taking apart old radios, studying diagrams, and coding on an ancient computer in the basement. I didn't make noise, and I never needed to. On my 12th birthday, they set up the living room with a simple cake and lit candles. Vivian came rushing in, holding a brand new printed catalog featuring her as the highlight of a campaign. The moment she opened it, all the attention shifted. I stood there watching as everyone talked about camera angles and facial expressions until the candles quietly burned out. I didn't complain. Competing for attention never made sense. As time went on, the pattern solidified. Vivian took part in photo shoots, local store commercials, and small mall events. I won programming and robotics awards, earned scholarships, but I kept my achievements to myself, like someone who knows real value doesn't come from applause. Slowly, I realized my path was meant to be walked with my head down and my steps steady. When I decided to major in computer science, I filled out the applications, bought my own plane tickets, and arranged the move on my own. No pep talk, no special dinner. At home, all the attention was still focused on Vivian's latest attempt to launch her own clothing line, so I packed my bags and left. At university, my days were split between demanding classes, extracurricular projects, and tech jobs to support my studies. I fixed outdated systems, built internal networks for small businesses, and learned to solve problems before anyone even noticed them. It was a way of life that matched who I was becoming. When I graduated and came back home, I placed my diploma on the dresser and immediately started looking for where I could put my skills to use. No celebration was waiting, but I didn't expect one. I knew the value of what I carried wasn't in being celebrated, it was in being applied, quietly, consistently, every single day. One random late night, while debugging code, I came across Sam Fletcher on an online forum. The connection was instant. He had big ideas, and I had the tools to make them real. We started building, no big promises, no flashy plans. While the house stayed stuck in memories of photo shoots and faded magazine spreads, I was already laying the foundation for something that, this time, not even silence could erase. Even after graduating, I kept the habit of showing up for Sunday lunches, part respect, part automatic reflex of someone still trying to balance roots and distance. The conversation stayed predictable. Vivian at the center, going on about new projects, local campaigns, and small appearances in promo videos. I listened quietly, never feeling the need to compete. But what used to be mere indifference started turning into something else. Vivian's comments grew sharper, though always disguised as jokes. One time, after I mentioned I worked in tech, she laughed and said, "These days, anyone can be a programmer. Just play video games all day and call yourself a genius." The table laughed along. No one thought to correct her. I just kept stirring my cold coffee, like it had nothing to do with me. It wasn't the joke itself, it was the tone. The way Vivian increasingly seemed to need to assert herself by downplaying what I had built. Maybe because she was starting to feel, without fully understanding, that the ground beneath her wasn't as solid as it used to be. I didn't argue. It wasn't worth it. But the crack that had always been there was beginning to take clearer shape. Meanwhile, Sam and I landed our first big predictive analytics contract. It wasn't fame level, but it was enough to fund the infrastructure we'd been designing for months. With the deal signed, I rented my own apartment in downtown Raleigh. A practical decision, made in silence, just like every other. I packed up and moved out. Visits to my parents' house became more spaced out. I had a routine that demanded early starts, late nights, and constant motion. But every time I did show up, the same pattern played out. Vivian glowing on the surface with new photo shoots, short-lived projects, collaborations that barely lasted a quarter. And me, quiet, closing deals, delivering reports, keeping long-term contracts growing in ways invisible to anyone only looking at the surface. It was during one of those visits that the tension peaked. I was casually telling my dad about a system we were implementing for a hospital network when Vivian cut in with a crooked smile. "So you guys are saving lives by pushing buttons now? Impressive," she said, dripping with sarcasm. My dad chuckled. My mom changed the subject. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just ignorance or distraction anymore. It was resistance. The idea that I had built something without their validation seemed like an affront to Vivian. And every time reality got a little too close, she pushed back with sarcasm. Sam and I were landing more contracts, hiring external teams, developing systems that competitors had already started copying. But at home, the same questions kept echoing. When are you going to get a real job? When will you stop hiding behind that computer stuff? I'd smile slightly and move on, because responding would mean justifying myself, and I was long past that point. The where didn't come from direct clashes, it came from the buildup. The sideways glances, the offhanded remarks dropped in casual conversation, the veiled comparisons. Vivian didn't need to yell. Her tone, her short laughs, her unfinished sentences were enough. And with every one of them, I found myself drifting further away, effortlessly. I knew the break was coming. Not because I wanted it, not because I planned it, but because some cycles, when stretched too far, eventually snap on their own. And looking at Vivian at that table, smiling with condescension as she talked about her latest attempt at launching a fitness clothing line, I knew it was only a matter of time. The last brunch I attended followed the usual script. Vivian was holding court, showing everyone photos on her phone from her latest ad campaign for a regional cosmetics brand. The family gathered around the table, laughing and complimenting her like every small contract was a leap toward national fame. I sat a bit off to the side, ordered my coffee, and just watched. No need to take part in the performance. When my name came up, it was through Aunt Laura, who casually asked if I still did stuff with computers. Before I could answer, Vivian laughed and dropped a line that cut through the room like a blade. "Looks like we'll be the ones holding him up. Working with computers sounds nice, until the rent's due." The room went quiet for a moment, followed by awkward chuckles. Some looked down. Others pretended not to hear. I didn't say anything. I just looked into my cup, steam still rising slowly. But inside me, the thread holding together any attempt at coexistence snapped. It wasn't anger, it was realization. Vivian didn't see me as someone who had built something. She saw me as a burden, a problem to be carried. And the rest of the family, through silence or laughter, made it clear that this was the role they expected me to accept. I finished my coffee, thanked my mom for the meal, and left without a fuss. On the walk to my car, I felt that quiet certainty that only comes when a decision is made without needing to say a word. I wasn't going back, not for dinners, not for birthdays, not for anything. Not as long as I was seen as some failed project that needed rescuing. The distance, which had been polite until then, would now be permanent. The weeks that followed confirmed I'd made the right choice. Messages from family went unanswered, invitations politely ignored. My energy had to be elsewhere. While DataHub was closing deals with new investment groups, my focus was on what was real, not on the empty expectations of a dining room stuck in the past. And in that silence, I started to hear echoes from the other side. Small pieces of news, slipping through here and there. A Vivian collab that was canceled before launch. A branding project that didn't renew. No big scandal. Just the quiet sound of fragile structures beginning to give way. I knew how to read those signs. The surface might still shine, but the foundation was already cracking. By that point, I didn't feel resentment. I didn't wish for her downfall. But I knew life has its own way of demanding growth. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. Vivian would have to face the real world, and she'd do it alone. Vivian's name still floated around in a few small circles in town, but it no longer carried the weight it used to. There was a hard-to-pin-down difference in the way people spoke about her, a hesitation, like someone mentioning something that used to matter but doesn't anymore. Small campaigns vanished quietly. Brands that once featured her face had moved on to younger, more engaged names. It was the kind of quiet fade-out that happens when no one's really looking. At Data Hub, the pace was entirely different. Charts climbing, deadlines shrinking, new teams forming too fast to stop for celebrations. HR had opened positions for communications assistants, roles needed to keep up with the machine that was growing under the radar. The openings weren't posted in newspapers or on social media. The ones who found them were the ones actually searching, not the ones waiting to be invited. Sam showed up at my office door one rainy afternoon. He tossed a tablet onto the desk with the screen already pulled up. I didn't even have to ask. Vivian Green, applied for communications assistant. The cool office light reflected off the glass, and for a second, the sound of the rain seemed to fill the silence between us. I stared at the name like it belonged to a stranger. Maybe, deep down, it did. I didn't give any special instructions. I simply asked that my name and role remain invisible. Here, she'd have to walk the path with no shortcuts, no audience, no applause. If she succeeded, it would be on merit. If not, she'd learn the only way life teaches those who refuse to listen. The process played out as usual. Vivian got through the initial interviews with the ease of someone who's always known how to sell an image. But now, the product was something else. Execution, meeting deadlines, being accountable for measurable results. The internal feedback I picked up effortlessly painted a clear picture. She still relied on charm in a space where consistency was what counted. When the confirmation came, it was just a plain line in an email, lost between reports and spreadsheets. Vivian Green, approved for the position of Corporate Digital Communications Assistant. Start date, next week. I closed the tab slowly, feeling the subtle tension in my fingers. A cycle had closed, not with revenge, just with the inevitability of watching a bridge collapse the moment someone decides to cross it. Vivian's world had changed. She didn't know it yet, but soon she'd find out that where she had always sought applause, there was now only the quiet pressure of people expecting results. And for the first time, without realizing it, she would have to stand on her own in a place where what you build isn't seen, but it carries weight. Vivian's first day started like any new employee's. She got her badge, her system login, and was guided to a desk on the side of the communications department. The supervisor gave her the rundown without wasting time. No one was impressed by her last name. This company had no space for empty charm, only for performance. In the first few weeks, she tried to show initiative. She sent suggestions to improve the internal newsletter, wanted to redesign the welcome presentation, and pitched a series of corporate videos. Every idea met the same standard replies. Awaiting alignment, material already finalized, directive already approved. Doors didn't slam shut, but they didn't open either. Her first major mistake came in a report on regional campaigns. She used images without checking usage rights and mixed data from different sources. The manager responded with his usual coldness. Inconsistent document. Correct it. No one pulled her aside to explain. Another analyst handled the corrections. Her name didn't appear on the final version. In the operational reports, her performance began to stand out, for the wrong reasons. High rate of rework, low engagement in meetings, repeated supervisor alerts. One afternoon, Sam mentioned to me, HR reached out, said she seems lost, trying to fit in, but nothing sticks. I nodded without replying. The pattern was becoming clear. A few days later, a communications intern passed along an odd bit of feedback to the tech team. said, "She just sat in the room for a while after the last critique, kind of frozen." Another mentioned she asked to review tasks from other departments, to better understand the flow. Small comments, but together they painted a quiet picture of discomfort. In an internal audit report, I noticed her name came up often. Nothing critical, but persistent. Tasks being sent back, duplicate messages, deliverables needing formal adjustments. The system marked them as resolved, but the repetition spoke for itself, and right then, without ever speaking to her, I already knew something in the structure was swallowing her entirely. It was around that time that the signs started showing. Sam told me Vivian seemed to freeze during a planning meeting when a manager casually said, "This was already cleared by Ethan." No one noticed it in the moment, but Sam said she started typing slower after that, as if her mind had to recalibrate what she'd just heard. Other details followed. An envelope labeled Executive, E. Green, sat on the legal team's counter for hours. A junior assistant saw Vivian staring at it, unmoving, long enough to catch attention. Nothing was said, but the report made its way to HR, and from there, as always, reached the right ears. In one of the hallways in Block 9, the security system caught something curious. Vivian suddenly stopped in front of the break room, looked toward a glass divider, and stood there, motionless. On the footage, she stays there for a minute and a half, not entering, not leaving. It was around my usual time. I had a strange feeling we nearly crossed paths, without either of us knowing. After that, she started moving more deliberately. Reports showed she accessed more files than necessary, revisited old intranet documents, and started attending meetings from other departments with unusual frequency. The behavior was typical of someone searching, even if they didn't know exactly what for. Sam told me, with a restrained laugh, that someone on the team had said, "The new assistant's asking a lot of questions about how the structure works. Wants to know who's really making the decisions behind the scenes." Sam played dumb, and I just kept reading the reports. Gradually, she started paying more attention to names. A financial manager mentioned Ethan as the one behind a budget reevaluation. Another analyst said, the roadmap revision came from the tech partner. It was all said casually, as it always had been, but this time, she was listening differently. On Thursday, around 10 in the morning, an intern walked into the legal office saying Vivian had stopped by the executive floor reception. She stood there, looking toward the meeting room with the door slightly open, where I had just signed off on a stack of documents with the tech board. She didn't go in, but she didn't leave quickly either. When I asked Sam, he just said, "She saw enough to start wondering. You can see it on her face." The company system hadn't changed because of her, but she had started moving inside it. The tension wasn't about her tasks anymore. It was about something bigger, shifting beyond her line of sight. And at that cautious pace, she was beginning to realize that the thing she always thought was invisible might actually be what was holding everything up. The meeting for the institutional campaign was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the executive wing. Sam and I were already in our seats, reviewing a few printed drafts when the first members of the communications team started arriving, pulling up chairs and opening laptops. The agenda was simple: review the tone of the messaging and approve the layouts before the presentation committee. Vivian walked in without hesitation. She had her notebook in hand, her face calm until she saw me. She froze on her third step. Her eyes met mine and locked. No doubt, no preparation. And in that exact second, the entire performance fell apart. Her body stiffened. Her grip on the notebook loosened. Her face dropped. She stood there, not sitting, not speaking. One of the analysts nearby noticed the pause and casually said, "Come sit with us, Vivian." That snapped her back to awareness. She took a shallow breath, adjusted her hair in an automatic motion, and replied, "Forgot my folder in the support room." She left silently, without a show. No one found it strange. I didn't look away from the table. The meeting went on as usual. Sam kicked things off with his usual tone, straightforward and to the point. While the marketing coordinator discussed conversion metrics, I quickly pulled up the internal security cam feed in the corner of my screen, a habit from managing the executive wing. In the hallway on the third floor, Vivian was standing still in front of the support room. No phone, no laptop, just there, like she was trying to figure out where she was or who she was. I shifted my focus back to the meeting. The system kept running. Layouts approved, schedule adjusted, goals reaffirmed. No one asked about her. Not Sam, not me. At Data Hub, the engine doesn't stop for personal aches, and maybe that hit harder than any silence I could have offered. About 40 minutes later, people began to stand up. Someone joked about the new coffee in the break room. Another teased the campaign slogan. Sam gathered his materials, glanced at me, and said, "If she's got something to say, she'll come back." I nodded. I stayed in the room. Minutes later, the doorknob turned. Vivian walked in alone, her posture still upright, but her gaze was different. There was no effort to look confident, no mask. She stood at the table, notebook still in hand, and stayed silent for a few seconds. "So it's you," she said softly. It wasn't a question, it was a realization. "Since the beginning," I replied. No need to explain what was already clear. She nodded slowly. The silence was thick, loaded with everything that had never been said, and no longer needed to be. "You knew I was here?" she asked. "Your name crossed my desk like anyone else's," I said. No sarcasm, just the plain truth. Vivian took a deep breath but didn't look me in the eye. "You could have said something." I kept my voice calm. I have, for years. And I think in that moment, it all hit her like a fast forward of every family gathering playing back in her head all at once. She didn't argue, didn't try to explain herself. And honestly, that might have been the most real thing she ever gave me. I opened the folder next to me and pulled out an envelope, placed it on the table. "Digital Inclusion Project. We need someone to lead the communications side. Your name's been suggested. The choice is yours." She looked at the envelope but didn't reach for it. Her arm trembled just a little, then steadied. The silence hung for a few more seconds, long enough to show she was replaying every word, every gesture, every moment she dismissed, not out of anger, but with that heavy, cold clarity that comes when you finally see the size of what you chose to overlook. Vivian looked like someone in the middle of a reckoning. The brother she always saw as a failure had become something else entirely, and now he was her boss. She didn't say thank you, didn't apologize, didn't rush out either. She just stood there a few more seconds, head slightly lowered, then turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. No noise, no drama, just someone still trying to process what they finally saw and could no longer pretend not to understand. Vivian stayed at Data Hub without asking questions, without seeking closeness. The change showed up in her output. Reports came in clean. Projects were well structured. Meetings were focused. She learned to speak only when needed, and when she did, it mattered. What once looked like vanity turned into precision. What used to be performance became consistency. No one on the team knew our history, and they didn't need to. As far as they were concerned, she was a rising employee, and I was the quiet executive who walked the halls twice a week and signed off on technical projects after hours. The relationship was functional. And in that space, she started earning her place the hardest way possible, through merit. When a strategic communications request came in during Q3, I assigned her name directly on the project board. No conversation, no notes. The notification went out like any other. She responded the same day, with the same cold clarity I would have used years ago. "Confirmed. I've already started the initial scope." That was enough. I delegated because I trusted her, and she understood it wasn't a favor, it was recognition. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday, we went to the usual family brunch. Our parents' house looked the same. Dark wood porch, burnt waffle smell in the air, overlapping chatter from aunts and cousins. I arrived early, grabbed a coffee, and sat in the corner, like I always had. No one noticed, until Vivian walked in. This time, she wasn't wearing makeup. She had on straight-cut pants, a white blouse, hair tied back. She greeted our parents with a restrained kiss, gave a few quick hellos, and sat on the opposite side of the table without making an entrance. She stayed quiet through most of the conversation until an uncle laughed and said, "So, Ethan's still living that invisible freelancer life?" Same old joke. Way too old. Vivian looked up and replied flatly, "You should catch up, Uncle. Ethan works harder than anyone here. He just doesn't show off." The words sliced through the room like a knife. No comeback, just silence. The kind of silence that's not awkward, it's acceptance. I didn't react. I kept sipping my coffee, head down. But I knew something had shifted. For the first time, people didn't laugh at me, didn't pretend to understand me. They just respected me. And maybe that's all I ever wanted. Vivian finished her coffee, got up before the others, and left with a quick wave. As she passed me, she didn't stop. But for a second, her eyes met mine. They didn't apologize, didn't ask for anything. They just acknowledged. And to me, that was more than enough. For a long time, I accepted being overlooked as part of who I was. But it wasn't. It was just the reflection of a family that confused presence with noise and effort with appearances. I wasn't looking for conflict or approval. I just wanted to build something undeniable, even for those who never bothered to see it. Vivian changed because reality demanded it. She stopped chasing validation through applause and finally started living on the same ground as the rest of us. She let go of the made-up glamour and began dealing with the world as it is. No audience, no shortcuts, no filters. And in that shift, our relationship found a different place. We didn't go back to being childhood siblings, and we didn't fake the bonds time had worn down. But now, there's respect. And where there's respect, a kind of quiet cordiality can grow between adults who have come to understand the value of each other's space. I'm still the same person I've always been. I work behind the scenes. I observe more than I speak. But now, when I look around, I'm no longer carrying the weight of proving anything to anyone. What needed to be seen was, and what needed to be said, I said it through action. Now I turn to you, the one who's made it this far. What did you think of my story? Would you have done anything differently? Have you lived through something similar? Drop a comment. Maybe your story is like mine, or maybe someone out there needs to hear it today. And if this journey meant something to you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who's ready to reclaim what's rightfully theirs. Respect, space, and voice.